Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, The Foundation. Keith Cooper had built his empire from nothing. At 45, he owned 3 construction companies across Texas, employed over 200 men, and commanded respect in every room he entered. His hands bore the scars of manual labor from his younger days, but his mind had evolved into something sharper, calculating, methodical, unforgiving. The Cooper family lived in a sprawling ranch house outside Austin, complete with stables, a private lake, and enough land to disappear for hours without seeing another soul. Keith had given his wife Marcella everything she'd ever wanted: designer clothes, luxury cars, and the social status that came with being married to a successful businessman. Their son, Evan, now 22, had graduated from UT with a business degree, groomed to eventually take over the family enterprises. But Keith didn't know that behind his back, his perfect family was rotting from the inside. Marcella Cooper had grown tired of her husband's intensity, his unwavering focus on business, and what she called his primitive need to control everything around him. At 38, she still turned heads with her auburn hair and emerald eyes, and she'd begun to crave the attention of younger men who saw her as exciting rather than just another wealthy businessman's wife. Roman Cook had entered their lives 6 months ago as Evan's college friend and business partner in a startup venture Keith had agreed to fund. 24 years old, charming, and hungry for success, Roman possessed the kind of smooth confidence that made people trust him instantly. He'd studied Keith's patterns, learned his weaknesses, and identified the cracks in the Cooper family foundation. What Keith didn't realize was that Roman's interest in the Cooper family extended far beyond business. He'd been systematically seducing Marcella while poisoning Evan's mind against his father, convincing the young man that Keith's old-school methods were holding back their generation's potential. The first signs appeared during family dinners. Evan would challenge Keith's decisions with arguments that sounded too sophisticated, too practiced. Marcella would stay out later, claiming book club meetings and charity events that Keith's contacts never seemed to attend. But Keith Cooper hadn't survived 20 years in construction by ignoring warning signs. He hired a private investigator. The photographs arrived on a Tuesday morning. Marcella and Roman in a hotel room downtown, their bodies intertwined in positions that made Keith's jaw clench. But worse were the recordings of their conversations, where they discussed Keith as if he were a fossil to be discarded, planning how to manipulate him into signing over more assets to Evan's business ventures. Roman's voice came through clearly. "Once we bleed him dry, we can disappear. Start fresh somewhere he'll never find us." Marcella's laugh was musical, cruel. "Evan's already working on the legal documents. His father trusts him completely. The stupid bastard won't know what hit him until it's too late." Keith played the recordings 3 times, each repetition crystallizing his resolve. He built everything from scratch once before. If they wanted to destroy him, they'd discover that Keith Cooper was far more dangerous as an enemy than he'd ever been as a husband or father. That night, Keith sat in his study, a glass of bourbon untouched on his desk, planning his response with the same methodical precision he'd used to build his business empire. He wouldn't just defend himself. He would ensure that everyone who betrayed him paid a price they'd never forget. The war was about to begin. Chapter 2, The Discovery. Keith's investigation into his family's betrayal revealed a web of deception that ran deeper than adultery. Over the next 2 weeks, he uncovered the full scope of their conspiracy while maintaining the facade of an oblivious husband and father. Roman Cook wasn't just sleeping with Marcella. He was using her to gain access to Keith's business network, copying client lists, stealing contract templates, and slowly siphoning information that would allow him to compete directly with Cooper Construction. The startup venture that Keith had funded was actually a front company designed to gradually absorb Keith's key employees and contracts. Evan's role proved even more devastating. Keith's own son had been forging signatures on bank documents, slowly transferring funds from the family trust into accounts that Roman controlled. The legal paperwork Marcella had mentioned wasn't just about business assets. They were planning to have Keith declared mentally incompetent, claiming his intense work habits and occasional fits of temper were signs of psychological instability. But Keith's most painful discovery came when he accessed Evan's personal computer. His son had been documenting Keith's daily routines, photographing his private safe combinations, and recording conversations during family dinners. The betrayal wasn't impulsive or passionate. It was calculated, thorough, and had been in progress for over a year. The breaking point came during what was supposed to be a family dinner celebrating Evan's latest business success. Keith arrived home early from a job site to find Roman at their dining table, acting as if he belonged there, while Marcella fawned over him and Evan discussed their plans with barely concealed excitement. "Dad, you look tired," Evan said, his voice carrying false concern. "Maybe you should consider stepping back from the day-to-day operations. Let the younger generation handle things." Roman nodded sympathetically. "Keith, you've accomplished so much. You deserve to enjoy retirement while you're still healthy enough to appreciate it." Marcella reached across the table to touch Keith's hand, her wedding ring catching the light. "We all think it would be best for everyone. You've been under so much stress lately." Keith looked at their faces, his wife, his son, and the man who was destroying his family, and saw nothing but greed masked as concern. They actually believed they could manipulate him into surrendering everything he'd built. "You're right," Keith said quietly, setting down his fork. "I have been under a lot of stress. Maybe I should do something about that." After dinner, Keith retreated to his study and made a series of phone calls. The first was to Bernard Houston, his most trusted foreman and a man who'd worked construction sites with Keith for 15 years. Bernard owed Keith his life, literally, after Keith had pulled him from a collapsing foundation and paid for his medical expenses when the man had no insurance. The second call went to Santiago Berger, a private security contractor Keith had met during a military housing project. Santiago ran a discreet firm that specialized in problem resolution for wealthy clients who needed situations handled quietly. The third call was to Keith's lawyer, Samuel Collier, who'd helped Keith navigate contract disputes and business acquisitions for over a decade. Samuel was old-school legal counsel, the kind who understood that some battles couldn't be won in courtrooms. By midnight, Keith had assembled his response team. Tomorrow, he would begin the systematic destruction of everyone who had betrayed him. But first, he needed to test their resolve to see how far they were willing to go. He sent Evan a text message. "Need to discuss some urgent business matters. Meet me at the downtown office tomorrow at 6 p.m. Come alone." Then Keith opened his laptop and began transferring funds from accounts that Evan didn't know about, moving money to secure locations that would be impossible to trace or access. If his family wanted to play financial warfare, they'd discover that Keith had been preparing for this possibility long before they'd made their first move. The next evening would mark the beginning of their education in consequences. Chapter 3. The First Strike. The downtown office of Cooper Construction occupied the entire third floor of a steel and glass building that Keith had purchased 5 years earlier. After hours, the space felt like a cathedral of ambition. Mahogany conference tables, walls lined with framed project photos, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Austin skyline. Evan arrived precisely at 6, wearing a suit that Keith had paid for, carrying a leather briefcase that Keith had given him for graduation. The young man's confidence was palpable as he strode into his father's corner office, clearly believing this meeting would advance their takeover plans. "Dad, you wanted to discuss business?" Evan settled into the chair across from Keith's desk, his posture relaxed and expectant. Keith opened a manila folder and spread its contents across the desk. Bank statements showing unauthorized transfers, copies of forged documents, photographs of Roman and Marcella together, and transcripts of conversations that proved Evan's complicity in the conspiracy. "I want to discuss your business, yes." Keith's voice remained calm, but Evan's confident expression began to crack as he recognized the evidence. "Specifically, I want to understand how my son became a thief and a traitor." Evan's face flushed, but he attempted to maintain his composure. "Dad, I can explain." "No explanation needed." Keith stood and walked to the window, his back to his son. "You've documented your crimes quite thoroughly. The question now is what we do about it. You don't understand the pressure I've been under." Evan's voice took on a pleading tone. Mom said you'd never listen, that you'd just explode and make everything worse. We thought if we could just take control gradually. Keith turned around, his eyes cold as winter steel. You thought you could steal from me gradually. You thought you could manipulate me into signing away everything I built. You thought I was stupid enough to trust my own family. The office door opened and Bernard Houston entered, his massive frame filling the doorway. Behind him came Santiago Berger, a compact man whose eyes held the flat, assessing gaze of someone accustomed to violence. Dad, what's going on? Evan stood up, his confidence finally cracking in a genuine fear. You wanted to discuss business, Keith said. So let's discuss the consequences of stealing from the wrong person. Bernard closed the office door and engaged the lock. Santiago moved to the windows and closed the blinds. Suddenly, the spacious office felt much smaller. The transfers you made, Keith continued. I've already reversed them. The accounts Roman thought he controlled? They never actually existed. They were honey traps I set up 6 months ago when I first suspected something was wrong. Every dollar you thought you were stealing was actually my money flowing into accounts I control. Evan's face went white. That's impossible. Roman showed me the confirmations. Roman showed you what I wanted him to see. Keith opened his laptop and turned the screen toward his son. Your friend has been working with fabricated documents for weeks. Every piece of information he thought he was stealing from my business? Completely false. Every contract he thought he was copying? Fake companies with fake contact information. The laptop displayed a series of folders labeled with Roman's name, each containing detailed documentation of their surveillance operation and the false information they'd fed him. While you and your mother were planning my downfall, Keith continued, I was planning yours. The difference is that I'm actually good at it. Evan looked toward the door, but Bernard's presence made any escape attempt pointless. Dad, please, we can work this out. I'll call off everything with Roman. I'll return the money. The money was never gone, and Roman's plans are about to become irrelevant. Keith moved to his desk safe and withdrew a thick envelope. Inside here are copies of every crime you've committed, along with evidence of Roman's identity theft, fraud, and conspiracy charges. Enough to put both of you away for 10 to 15 years. You can't do this, Evan's voice cracked. I'm your son. Keith looked at the young man he'd raised, taught, and trusted, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. You stopped being my son the moment you decided to steal from me. Now you're just another criminal who made the mistake of targeting the wrong victim. Santiago stepped forward and handed Evan a single sheet of paper. Confession letter, the security contractor explained in a flat voice. Details your crimes and Romans. Sign it, and your father might consider allowing you to leave the country instead of going to prison. And if I don't sign? Keith smiled, and for the first time in his life, Evan saw his father as something genuinely terrifying. Then we test how much pressure your kneecaps can handle before they shatter. Bernard here used to work demolition before construction. He knows exactly how much force different joints can withstand. Evan looked at the 3 men surrounding him and realized that his father wasn't bluffing. This wasn't the businessman who'd raised him. This was the man who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd survived in industries where weakness meant destruction. With shaking hands, Evan signed the confession. Excellent, Keith said, taking the document and placing it in his safe. Now we're going to discuss what happens next. Chapter 4, The Trap Springs. The plan Keith had orchestrated over the following 3 weeks was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. While Evan remained under house arrest, effectively imprisoned in his own apartment under Bernard's watchful eye, Keith allowed Roman and Marcella to believe their scheme was proceeding perfectly. Roman had spent those weeks frantically trying to contact his secret accounts, unaware that every transaction he attempted was being monitored and recorded. The fake business documents Keith had prepared led Roman deeper into fabricated deals with non-existent clients, while Keith's real business continued operating through channels that Roman had never discovered. Marcella, meanwhile, had grown bolder in her affair, believing that Keith's recent distraction meant he was unaware of her activities. She'd been staying out later, spending more money, and making increasingly careless phone calls that Keith's surveillance team recorded with crystal clarity. The convergence came on a Friday evening when Marcella announced she was attending a charity gala downtown, an event that Keith knew she'd never RSVP'd for because he controlled the guest list. Instead, she was meeting Roman at an upscale hotel where they planned to celebrate what they believed was the final phase of their takeover. Keith arrived at the hotel first, having reserved the suite directly above theirs. Santiago's team had installed surveillance equipment throughout Roman's room during the afternoon, while Keith positioned himself to capture everything they said and did. What he recorded exceeded even his darkest expectations. Roman and Marcella weren't just planning to steal Keith's money. They intended to stage his death. Roman had connections with medical professionals who could make a heart attack appear natural, especially for a man Keith's age who worked in high-stress construction environments. They discussed the timing, the method, and how they would console grieving son Evan while quietly liquidating Keith's assets. The insurance alone will be worth millions. Marcella's voice came through clearly on the recording. And once he's gone, nobody will question Evan's authority to make business decisions. Roman's laugh was cold and confident. Your husband thinks he's so smart, but he's just another old man who doesn't understand how the modern world works. Tomorrow night, Keith Cooper becomes a tragic statistic. Keith listened to their plans with growing anticipation. They weren't just thieves anymore. They were would-be murderers. The legal and moral restrictions that might have limited his response had just evaporated completely. The next evening, Keith hosted what he announced as an impromptu family barbecue at the ranch. He told Marcella he wanted to celebrate Evan's business success and discuss some important family decisions. Roman was invited as Evan's business partner and close family friend. Marcella arrived nervous but excited, believing this was Keith's surrender disguised as a celebration. Roman came confident and charming, playing his role perfectly. Evan attended under duress, knowing that Bernard was watching his every move. Keith grilled steaks on the back patio while his guests enjoyed drinks and made small talk. The evening felt almost normal. A successful businessman entertaining his family and their friends beside the lake he'd paid to stock with bass and catfish. "Roman," Keith called out as he flipped the meat. "Could you help me carry these plates inside? I want to show you something in my study." Roman followed Keith into the house, chatting easily about business prospects and family dynamics. Keith's study felt warm and inviting, with leather-bound books and hunting trophies creating the atmosphere of old-world success. "Impressive collection," Roman said, examining the mounted deer heads and framed photographs of Keith's construction projects. "I've always believed in displaying my conquests," Keith replied, closing the study door behind them. "Speaking of which, I have something to show you." Keith activated his laptop and turned the screen toward Roman. The hotel room surveillance footage began playing, showing Roman and Marcella in intimate detail, followed by their recorded conversation about murdering Keith. Roman's confident expression dissolved into something approaching panic. "Keith, I can explain." "No need for explanations." Keith opened a desk drawer and withdrew a pistol, which he placed on the desk between them. "The question is whether you'd prefer to handle this like men, or if I should call the police and let them sort out your murder conspiracy." Roman stared at the weapon, his mind racing through options that didn't exist. "You can't be serious. This is insane. What's insane is thinking you could murder me and steal everything I've built." Keith's voice remained conversational, almost friendly. "The beauty of your plan was its simplicity. Unfortunately, you targeted someone who spent 20 years dealing with men who think violence solves problems." Through the study windows, they could see Marcella and Evan sitting by the lake, unaware that Roman's fate was being decided 50 yards away. "I never wanted to hurt you," Roman said desperately. "It was Marcella's idea. She said you'd never give her a divorce, that you'd fight her for every asset. She convinced me that this was the only way." Keith nodded thoughtfully. "Marcella always was persuasive, but you're a grown man who made grown-up choices. Now you get to live with the consequences. What do you want? Money? I'll disappear and never contact them again. You'll never see me. What I want," Keith said, picking up the pistol and checking its load, "is for you to walk outside and explain to my wife and son that their plan failed. I want you to tell them exactly what's going to happen next. Roman's face went ashen. And if I refuse? Keith smiled the same cold smile that had terrified Evan in the office. Then I'll drag your body outside and explain it myself. Either way, they're going to understand that their game is over. Roman looked at the gun, at Keith's implacable expression, and at the study door that led back to the lake where Marcella waited. For the first time in his life, he truly understood what it meant to be completely outmatched. All right, he whispered. I'll tell them. Chapter 5. The Reckoning Begins. The walk from Keith's study to the lake took less than a minute, but for Roman it felt like a death march. Keith followed 3 steps behind, the pistol concealed but ready, while Marcella and Evan sat on the wooden dock sharing what they believed were triumphant whispers about their imminent success. Marcella, Roman called out, his voice hoarse with fear. We need to talk. She turned with a brilliant smile that faltered when she saw Roman's ashen complexion and Keith's grim expression behind him. Evan looked up from his chair, confusion replacing his usual sullen resentment. Roman, darling, what's wrong? Marcella stood up, her designer dress pristine and her emerald earrings catching the sunset light. You look terrible. Tell her. Keith's voice carried clearly across the evening air. Tell both of them what you discussed at the hotel last night. Roman's mouth opened and closed like a fish pulled from the lake. Marcella's confusion shifted to alarm as she realized something had gone catastrophically wrong with their carefully laid plans. Keith, what's this about? She demanded, switching to the imperious tone she used when caught in minor lies about shopping expenses or social commitments. Your boyfriend has something to share about your conversation regarding my unfortunate future heart attack, Keith replied calmly. Go ahead, Roman. Explain to my family how you planned to murder me. The words hit Marcella like physical blows. Her face cycled through denial, panic, and finally desperate calculation as she realized the extent of Keith's knowledge. Evan jumped up from his chair, looking between his parents with growing horror. Dad, what are you talking about? Evan's voice cracked with stress. Murder? That's insane. Keith withdrew his phone and played the hotel room recording. Roman and Marcella's voices filled the evening air, discussing murder with the casual tone most people reserve for dinner plans. Their words about staging Keith's death, liquidating his assets, and consoling grieving, Evan created a surreal soundtrack to the peaceful lakeside setting. Marcella's carefully maintained composure shattered completely. Keith, please, you don't understand. It was just talk, just fantasy. We never would have actually. Shut up. Keith's command cut through her protests with absolute authority. Roman, continue with your explanation. Roman looked at Marcella's desperate face and realized that any chance of survival lay in complete honesty. We plan to kill you tomorrow night. Make it look like a heart attack. Marcella knew your routines, your medical history. We had contacts who could make it appear natural. Evan staggered backward, as if struck. Mom, tell me this isn't true. Tell me you weren't actually planning to murder Dad. Marcella's desperate gaze shifted between the 3 men, searching for any avenue of escape or manipulation. Finding none, she straightened her shoulders and revealed the cold calculation that had always lurked beneath her social mask. Your father is a dinosaur, Evan. He was holding all of us back with his primitive thinking and iron control. Roman and I could have built something magnificent from his assets, something worthy of the 21st century instead of his caveman mentality. The admission hung in the air like poison gas. Evan looked at his mother with dawning horror, finally understanding that the woman who'd raised him was capable of murdering his father for money and social status. You're insane, Evan whispered. Both of you are completely insane. Keith felt a moment of hope that his son might yet redeem himself, but Marcella's next words destroyed that possibility. Don't be naive, Evan. You've been helping us for months. Your fingerprints are on every document, every transfer, every piece of evidence that Keith has collected. If we go down, you go down with us. The hope in Keith's eyes died as he watched Evan's face. Instead of rejecting his mother's logic, the young man began nodding slowly, his expression hardening with familiar Cooper stubbornness. She's right, Dad. If you turn them in, I'm ruined too. My whole life is destroyed. Your life is already destroyed, Keith replied. The question is whether you have enough dignity left to face the consequences like a man, or if you'll keep following these two parasites into deeper shame. Evan looked at his father, then at Roman and Marcella, and made his choice. I'm sorry, Dad, but I can't go to prison. We'll have to find another solution. Keith nodded slowly, the last vestige of fatherly love finally extinguished. I see. Well, then you've all made your positions clear. Keith, please. Marcella stepped forward, her voice taking on the seductive tone she'd used during their courtship 20 years earlier. We can work this out. Nobody has to get hurt. We can divide the assets fairly, start fresh. You're still young enough to rebuild. You're right, Keith said. Nobody else has to get hurt. The emphasis on else wasn't lost on any of them. Roman reached into his pocket, prompting Keith to reveal the pistol he'd been concealing. Hands where I can see them, Keith commanded. All of you. Roman slowly withdrew his hand, empty except for his car keys. Keith, this has gone far enough. You're not a killer. Let's all calm down and discuss this rationally. You plan to murder me in my sleep, Keith replied conversationally. Rationality ended when you decided my life was worth less than my bank account. Marcella tried once more. The courts will understand. Temporary insanity, crime of passion. You'll get counseling and probation. Your businesses will survive. Keith looked at his wife of 20 years, the mother of his child, the woman he'd given everything to, and felt nothing but contempt. You still think this is about legal consequences. You still don't understand what you've awakened. A truck engine rumbled in the distance, growing closer. Bernard Houston's pickup appeared on the ranch road, followed by Santiago's dark SUV. Keith had called them during Roman's confession in the study. The cavalry arrives, Keith observed. Now we can begin the real conversation about consequences. As the vehicles parked and their occupants emerged, Roman, Marcella, and Evan finally understood that Keith hadn't brought them here for negotiation. He'd brought them here for judgment. Chapter 6. The Chair. Bernard Houston and Santiago Berger approached the lakeside gathering with the purposeful stride of men accustomed to unpleasant work. Behind them came two additional men Keith had never seen before, Santiago's associates, their faces professionally blank and their movements economical. Evening, boss. Bernard nodded to Keith while keeping his eyes on the three conspirators. Everything ready. Keith surveyed his wife, son, and their accomplice with the same calculating gaze he used to assess unstable construction sites. Bring the chair from the truck. Santiago's men retrieved a heavy wooden chair from the vehicle, an antique piece with solid oak construction and brass fittings that looked like it belonged in a medieval castle. They carried it to the dock and positioned it facing the lake, its imposing presence creating an atmosphere of impending judgment. Sit down, Roman. Keith's command carried absolute authority. Roman looked at the chair, then at the 5 men surrounding him, and understood that cooperation was his only option for avoiding immediate violence. He settled into the seat, his hands gripping the armrests with white-knuckle intensity. This chair belonged to my grandfather, Keith explained conversationally. He used it when he needed to have serious conversations with men who'd crossed him. It survived longer than most of the people who sat in it. Marcella's voice came out as a desperate whisper. Keith, please, this is madness. Think about what you're doing. I am thinking, very clearly. Keith positioned himself directly in front of Roman. I'm thinking about how you plan to murder me. I'm thinking about how my wife chose greed over loyalty. I'm thinking about how my son chose theft over honor. Evan stepped forward, his voice shaking. Dad, we can still fix this. Nobody has to get hurt. We'll leave town, disappear, never bother you again. Keith's laugh was harsh and humorless. Fix this? Son, you helped plan my murder. There's no fixing that level of betrayal. Bernard moved to stand behind Roman's chair, his massive hands resting on the wooden back. Santiago positioned himself to Keith's right, while his associates flanked Marcella and Evan. Roman, Keith continued, I want you to explain to everyone here exactly how you plan to kill me. Every detail. Roman's voice emerged as barely more than a whisper. Digitalis, injected into your nighttime bourbon, would cause cardiac arrest that looked completely natural for a man your age. And after I was dead, Marcella would inherit everything as your wife. Evan would manage the businesses as your son and heir. I would help them modernize your operations. Keith nodded thoughtfully. A thorough plan, well-researched, almost professional in its scope. He paused, studying Roman's terrified face. Unfortunately, you made one crucial mistake. What mistake? You assumed I was the kind of man who could be murdered quietly. Keith's voice dropped to a growl. You assumed wrong. Without warning, Keith drove his fist into Roman's stomach with the force of a sledgehammer. The younger man doubled over, gasping for air, his body convulsing as he fought to breathe. Dad, stop! Evan lurched forward, but Santiago's associates restrained him with professional efficiency. Keith grabbed Roman by the hair and pulled his head back to face level. That was for plotting my murder. We're just getting started. The next punch caught Roman across the jaw with a wet cracking sound that made Marcella scream and Evan struggle harder against his captors. Blood flowed from Roman's mouth as he slumped in the chair, barely conscious. Keith, please. Marcella's voice cracked with hysteria. I'll do anything you want. I'll sign any papers, give you any assets, submit to any punishment. Just stop this. Keith turned to his wife with eyes that held no trace of the man who'd once promised to love and protect her. You want to make a deal? Fine. Watch me break every bone in your boyfriend's body, and I'll consider letting you keep your life. You can't be serious. The sound of Roman's ribs cracking under the chair interrupted her protest. Keith had driven his knee into the man's chest with the force of a battering ram, and something vital had given way under the impact. Roman's scream echoed across the lake, sending waterfowl erupting from the reeds in panicked flight. He tried to curl up in the chair, but Bernard's hands held him upright with inexorable strength. I heard my ribs crack under the chair, Keith said to himself, as if testing how the word sounded. Yes, that has a nice ring to it. Evan was crying now, tears streaming down his face as he watched his father systematically destroy the man he'd considered a friend and business partner. Dad, this isn't you. You're not a killer. Keith paused in his assault to study his son's face. You're right. I'm not a killer. I'm something much worse. I'm a man who's been betrayed by his own family. He turned back to Roman, who was struggling to breathe through what were clearly several broken ribs. The beauty of your plan was its simplicity. Unfortunately, my response is even simpler. Keith's next blow was carefully calculated, enough force to cause excruciating pain without causing immediate death. Roman's left arm bent at an unnatural angle as the bone snapped under Keith's grip. Keith, stop this. Marcella's voice had risen to a shriek. You've made your point. We understand. We're sorry. Sorry. Keith looked at her with genuine curiosity. You plan to murder me and steal everything I've built, and you think sorry covers that debt? He returned his attention to Roman, who was now semi-conscious and bleeding from multiple wounds. The difference between us, Roman, is that when I hurt someone, they stay hurt. The final blow was delivered with surgical precision, Keith's fist connecting with Roman's temple in exactly the spot that would cause maximum brain trauma without immediate death. Roman's body went limp in the chair, his breathing shallow and labored. Is he dead? Santiago asked with professional interest. Keith checked Roman's pulse. Not yet, but he will be shortly. Internal bleeding, brain trauma, multiple fractures. Even if we called an ambulance right now, he wouldn't survive the trip to the hospital. Marcella stared at her dying lover with horror-stricken eyes. You murdered him. You actually murdered him. No, Keith corrected. I executed him. There's a difference. Chapter 7. The Hospital. Keith's call to 911 came exactly 12 minutes after Roman's last breath. Calculated timing that would allow paramedics to attempt resuscitation while ensuring that the attempt would fail. When the ambulance arrived, Keith played the role of concerned family friend perfectly, explaining that Roman had suffered some kind of sudden medical emergency during their lakeside barbecue. He just collapsed, Keith told the lead paramedic, his voice heavy with false concern. Started convulsing, then stopped breathing. We tried CPR, but... The paramedics worked frantically over Roman's body, but 20 minutes of advanced life support couldn't overcome the systematic internal damage Keith had inflicted. Roman Cook was pronounced dead at 9:47 p.m. Cause of death listed as cardiac arrest pending autopsy. At the hospital, Keith sat in the waiting room with Marcella and Evan, maintaining the facade of a grieving family friend while his wife and son struggled with the psychological trauma of watching someone die violently. Other families moved through the sterile corridors dealing with their own medical emergencies, unaware that one of their fellow visitors was a methodical killer. Mr. Cooper, a young doctor, approached their group, her expression professionally sympathetic. "I'm Dr. Alicia Chambers. I'm sorry for your loss." Keith stood and shook her hand with appropriate solemnity. "Thank you, doctor. Roman was like family to us. Is there anything you can tell us about what happened?" Dr. Chambers glanced at her chart. The preliminary examination suggests massive cardiac failure, possibly brought on by an undiagnosed heart condition. We'll know more after the autopsy, but sometimes young people have genetic abnormalities that don't manifest until they're under extreme stress. Stress. Marcella's voice came out as a strangled whisper. Physical or emotional trauma can trigger cardiac events in susceptible individuals. The doctor explained kindly. Had Mr. Cook been experiencing any unusual pressure lately? Work stress, relationship problems, financial difficulties? Keith answered before Marcella could speak. Roman was excited about a new business venture. Maybe too excited. He'd been pushing himself pretty hard the last few weeks. Dr. Chambers nodded. Overwork is more dangerous than people realize, especially for young men who think they're invincible. She handed Keith a business card. The hospital social worker can help coordinate funeral arrangements if the family needs assistance. After the doctor left, Keith sat back down between his wife and son, his presence radiating calm authority while they struggled with shock and guilt. The hospital's fluorescent lighting cast harsh shadows across their faces, making them look older and more haggard than their years. "What happens now?" Evan whispered, his voice barely audible above the ambient hospital noise. "Now we go home," Keith replied calmly. "We mourn our friend's sudden passing. We support each other through this difficult time." Marcella looked at her husband with dawning horror. "You're going to pretend nothing happened. You murdered Roman, and you're going to act like he died of natural causes." "Roman did die of natural causes," Keith said quietly. "The natural consequence of planning to murder someone who doesn't forgive betrayal." A nurse approached their group. "Mr. Cooper, the police would like to speak with you about Mr. Cook's death. It's routine for sudden fatalities." Keith followed the nurse to a small consultation room where Detective Louise Holt waited with a notepad and a tired expression. Holt was a 20-year veteran of Austin PD, experienced enough to recognize when something didn't add up, but pragmatic enough to work with the evidence he had. "Mr. Cooper, I understand you were present when Mr. Cook collapsed?" Keith nodded gravely. "Terrible thing. He was so young, so full of life. Can you walk me through what happened? Start from when Mr. Cook arrived at your property." Keith provided a carefully crafted timeline that positioned Roman's death as a sudden medical emergency during a family gathering. He described Roman as excited about business prospects, perhaps drinking more than usual, complaining of chest pains shortly before collapsing. Did Mr. Cook have any enemies? Anyone who might want to harm him? Roman was well liked by everyone who knew him. Keith replied with perfect sincerity. "He was dating my wife's sister and working with my son on a startup venture. Very much part of our extended family." Detective Holt made notes while Keith spoke, occasionally asking for clarification on timing or specific details. The interview lasted 30 minutes and concluded with Holt's assessment that Roman's death appeared to be a tragic but natural occurrence. "We'll wait for the autopsy results before closing the file," Holt explained. "But unless something unexpected turns up, this looks like a young man who pushed himself too hard and paid the ultimate price." Keith returned to the waiting room, where Marcella and Evan sat in stunned silence. The reality of their situation was beginning to sink in. Roman was dead. Their conspiracy had collapsed, and Keith held complete control over their fates. The detective said they're treating it as a natural death pending autopsy, Keith reported. No criminal investigation planned unless the medical examiner finds something suspicious. "And will they?" Marcella asked quietly. Keith's smile was cold and satisfied. Roman died of cardiac arrest brought on by internal injuries. The question is whether those injuries appear consistent with a sudden medical emergency or prolonged physical assault. What does that mean? It means that Santiago's people know how to hurt someone without leaving obvious evidence of murder. Roman's broken ribs could have resulted from falling during cardiac arrest. His other injuries are consistent with convulsions and impact trauma from hitting the dock. Evan stared at his father with growing comprehension. You planned this. The whole thing. You knew exactly how to kill him without getting caught. I knew exactly how to eliminate a threat to my family without facing legal consequences, Keith corrected. The fact that Roman chose to threaten my life made his death a matter of self-defense. Marcella began crying, not from grief for Roman, but from terror at the realization that the man she'd lived with for 20 years was capable of cold-blooded murder disguised as protective action. What happens to us? She whispered through her tears. Keith stood up and straightened his jacket, once again the successful businessman dealing with an unfortunate family emergency. That depends entirely on how well you've learned tonight's lesson about the consequences of betrayal. Chapter 8. The Courtroom. 3 weeks after Roman's funeral, Keith received the call he'd been expecting. The medical examiner had completed the autopsy and identified several injuries that raised questions about the circumstances of death. While the official cause remained cardiac arrest, Detective Holt wanted to conduct additional interviews with everyone present that evening. Keith hired the best criminal defense attorney in Austin, Samuel Collier's recommendation, and prepared for the legal battle he'd anticipated from the beginning. The lawyer, Salvatore Camacho, had built his reputation defending wealthy clients accused of violent crimes, and he understood immediately that Keith's case would require careful narrative management. The physical evidence is problematic, Camacho explained during their first meeting. Multiple broken ribs, fractured arm, significant internal bleeding. While these injuries could theoretically result from a cardiac episode, they're more consistent with assault. Keith listened calmly to the legal assessment. What's our best defense strategy? Self-defense, if necessary. Roman Cook was having an affair with your wife and conspiring to defraud your business. If the prosecution can prove you killed him, we argue that you discovered their plot and acted to protect yourself. And my wife and son's testimony? Camacho's expression grew grim. That's our biggest vulnerability. If they testify against you, especially about premeditation, we're facing murder charges. Keith smiled with the confidence of a man who'd planned for every contingency. Let me worry about my family's testimony. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in downtown Austin. Keith arrived wearing his best suit, looking every inch the successful businessman who'd been tragically caught up in circumstances beyond his control. Marcella and Evan sat in the gallery behind him, their faces pale and drawn from weeks of psychological pressure. The prosecution's case relied heavily on the medical evidence and witness testimony from the evening of Roman's death. Assistant DA Crystal Frederick was young, ambitious, and convinced that Keith Cooper had committed murder during what she characterized as a domestic dispute that escalated to deadly violence. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Frederick began her opening statement. The defendant Keith Cooper discovered that his wife was having an affair with Roman Cook. Instead of pursuing legal remedies like divorce or civil litigation, Mr. Cooper chose to handle the situation with his fists. What began as confrontation ended in the brutal murder of a young man whose only crime was falling in love with the wrong woman. Camacho's opening focused on Keith's character, 20 years of business success, community involvement, and family dedication. He portrayed Roman as a predatory young man who'd seduced Keith's wife and manipulated his son as part of an elaborate financial fraud. Keith Cooper isn't a killer, Camacho told the jury. He's a father and husband who discovered that his trust had been betrayed by the people closest to him. When confronted with evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud, Roman Cook became violent and threatened Keith's life. What happened next was a father protecting himself and his family from a dangerous criminal. The prosecution's first witness was Dr. Alicia Chambers, who testified about Roman's injuries and the medical improbability of such extensive trauma resulting from cardiac arrest alone. Her testimony was damaging but circumstantial. She could establish that Roman's injuries suggested assault, but couldn't prove who had inflicted them. Detective Holt followed with testimony about the crime scene investigation and his interviews with the Cooper family. His notes documented inconsistencies in their stories and his growing suspicion that Roman's death wasn't natural. But the prosecution's case began to unravel when they called Marcella Cooper to testify. "Mrs. Cooper," Frederick began, "please describe your relationship with Roman Cook." Marcella looked at Keith, then at the jury, her hands trembling as she gripped the witness standrail. He was my son's business partner." "Only a business partner?" A long pause. Keith's eyes never left his wife's face as she struggled with a decision that would determine both their fates. "Roman was also. We had become close friends." Frederick pressed harder. "Mrs. Cooper, were you having an extramarital affair with Roman Cook?" Another pause, longer this time. Marcella's gaze found Keith's, and she saw something in his expression that made her choice clear. "No," she said firmly. "Roman and I were friends, nothing more. He was helping Evan with his business, and he spent time at our house because of that relationship." Frederick looked stunned. "Mrs. Cooper, are you certain?" "Because we have evidence suggesting." "Objection," Camacho interrupted. "The witness has answered the question." The judge sustained the objection, and Frederick moved on to the events of the evening Roman died. But Marcella's testimony continued to support Keith's version. Roman had suffered what appeared to be a sudden medical emergency. Keith had tried to help him, and the gathering had been a routine family barbecue with no hint of violence or confrontation. Evan's testimony proved equally supportive. He described Roman as a friend and business partner who'd shown no signs of conflict with Keith. He portrayed the evening as a pleasant family gathering that turned tragic when Roman suddenly collapsed. "Did you observe any violence between your father and Mr. Cook?" Frederick asked. "No," Evan replied without hesitation. "Dad tried to help Roman when he started having trouble breathing. We all did." "No arguing? No physical confrontation? Nothing like that. It was just a normal evening until Roman got sick." Frederick's case collapsed over the next 2 days as witness after witness, all of whom Keith had either influenced or intimidated, testified to his good character and Roman's sudden medical emergency. The prosecution couldn't produce a single witness willing to describe Keith as violent or Roman's death as anything other than a tragic natural occurrence. When Camacho presented Keith's defense, he focused on character witnesses from the construction industry who described Keith as a fair but firm businessman who'd never been known for violence. He produced business records showing that Keith's companies were financially healthy, undermining any motive for killing Roman to prevent fraud. Most importantly, Camacho presented Keith himself as a witness. "Mr. Cooper," his lawyer began, "did you kill Roman Cook?" Keith looked directly at the jury, his expression radiating sincere grief and confusion. "Absolutely not. Roman was like a son to me. His death was a tragedy that's devastated our entire family." "Did you ever suspect that Mr. Cook was involved in fraudulent activity regarding your business?" "Never. Roman was bright, ambitious, full of good ideas. I was proud to support his business ventures with Evan." "And your relationship with your wife? Were you aware of any inappropriate relationship between her and Mr. Cook?" Keith's performance was masterful, a man struggling with painful questions while maintaining his dignity and love for his family. Marcella and Roman were friends. She enjoyed having young people around the house. There was nothing inappropriate about their relationship. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with a not guilty verdict. As Keith walked out of the courthouse a free man, he paused on the steps to address the gathered media. Marcella and Evan flanked him, playing their roles as the grieving family that had been put through additional trauma by an overzealous prosecution. "We're grateful that the jury saw through the prosecution's attempts to criminalize tragedy," Keith said, his arm around Marcella's shoulders. "Roman Cook was a fine young man who died too young. Our family will continue to mourn his loss while rebuilding our lives." That evening, Keith sat in his study with a glass of bourbon, reviewing the legal documents that would formalize his family's new understanding. Marcella and Evan had signed comprehensive confessions detailing their conspiracy with Roman, along with agreements transferring all their assets to Keith's control. They would remain in Austin, living in the ranch house under Keith's supervision, their every movement monitored by Santiago's security team. They would maintain the facade of a loving family, while serving as living reminders of the consequences of betrayal. Keith had won completely, legally, financially, and psychologically. His enemies were dead or broken, his assets were secure, and his reputation remained intact. The price had been his family's souls, but Keith Cooper had never been a man who regretted necessary sacrifices. Chapter 9. The X-Rays. 6 months after the trial, Keith's dominance over his family had crystallized into a routine of psychological control that made their ranch house feel more like a minimum security prison. Marcella moved through her days like a ghost, maintaining appearances for neighbors and business associates while living under constant surveillance. Evan worked at Cooper Construction under Bernard's direct supervision, his every decision subject to Keith's approval, his future permanently tethered to his father's mercy. The final act of Keith's revenge began with a phone call from Dr. Chambers at Austin General Hospital. "Mr. Cooper, we've had an unusual development regarding Roman Cook's case. During a routine review of old files, we discovered some X-rays that were taken but never properly filed with his autopsy report." Keith felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. "What do the X-rays show, doctor?" "Multiple fractures consistent with blunt force trauma, inflicted at least an hour before death. The bone displacement pattern suggests systematic assault rather than accidental injury during cardiac arrest." "That sounds serious." "It is serious, Mr. Cooper. These X-rays would have changed the medical examiner's initial findings significantly. They clearly indicate that Roman Cook was murdered." Keith arranged to collect the X-rays personally, ostensibly to deliver them to the police as a concerned citizen who wanted justice for his friend. But his real purpose was to possess the physical evidence that could destroy him, and use it to complete his psychological domination of his family. That evening, Keith called a family meeting in his study. Marcella and Evan took their usual seats across from his desk, their faces showing the resigned wariness of people who'd learned to fear these gatherings. "I have something to show you," Keith said, spreading the X-rays across his desk under the bright lamp. "Roman's final gift to our family." The images were stark and undeniable. Dozens of fractures in Roman's ribs, arms, and spine, each break clearly showing the force and direction of impact. Even to untrained eyes, the pattern told an obvious story of prolonged, systematic violence. Marcella stared at the X-rays with horror. "Keith, what are these?" "Evidence of murder. Proof that Roman Cook was beaten to death by someone who knew exactly how to inflict maximum damage." Keith's voice remained conversational, almost educational. "The hospital found them during a file review. They're about to be turned over to the police." Evan's face went white. "Dad, if these get out, I'll be arrested for murder, tried again, and almost certainly convicted." Keith nodded calmly. "These X-rays would have prevented my acquittal if they'd been available during the trial." Marcella's voice came out as a whisper. "What are you going to do?" Keith picked up one of the X-ray films and held it to the light, studying the fracture patterns with professional interest. "That depends entirely on my family's continued cooperation. You want us to help you destroy evidence. I want you to understand that your fates are permanently linked to mine." Keith set down the X-ray and fixed them both with his implacable stare. "If these X-rays surface, I'm convicted of murder. But before I go to prison, I'll ensure that both of you are charged as accessories and co-conspirators." "That's impossible," Evan protested. "We testified in your defense." "You committed perjury in my defense," Keith corrected. "You lied under oath to help a murderer escape justice. When I'm convicted, both of your testimonies become evidence of criminal conspiracy. You'll face charges for obstruction, perjury, and accessory after the fact." The legal implications settled over them like a suffocating blanket. Keith had structured their complicity so thoroughly that they couldn't expose him without destroying themselves. "But there's another option," Keith continued, opening his desk drawer to reveal the signed confessions from months earlier. "These documents detail your conspiracy with Roman. including your knowledge of his plan to murder me. If the X-rays surface, I'll claim self-defense again, but this time I'll have written proof that Roman was planning to kill me. Marcella realized the trap's full dimensions. You'll use our confessions to justify murdering Roman. I'll use your confessions to prove that I killed Roman to prevent my own murder. Perfect self-defense, supported by written documentation of the threat to my life. Keith's smile was coldly triumphant. The same evidence that proves your guilt becomes proof of my innocence. Evan looked at the X-rays, then at his father, finally understanding the scope of Keith's planning. You wanted the X-rays to surface. You've been waiting for this moment. I prepared for this moment, Keith corrected. The difference between successful men and failures is that successful men plan for every contingency. Keith walked to his safe and withdrew a manila envelope containing copies of all the X-rays. Tomorrow morning, I'm delivering these to Detective Holt with a cover letter explaining that I recently remembered some details about Roman's behavior that evening. His agitation, his threats, his attempt to attack me when I confronted him about the fraud. You're going to frame this as self-defense? I'm going to present the truth in proper context. Roman Cook planned to murder me, as documented in your signed confessions. When I confronted him with evidence of his crimes, he became violent and threatened my life. I defended myself with appropriate force. Unfortunately, Roman's injuries proved fatal. Keith returned to his desk and began placing the X-rays back in their envelope. The beauty of this situation is that justice will finally be served. Roman's murder will be solved, but the killer will be legally justified in his actions. Marcella struggled to find words for the magnitude of Keith's manipulation. You're going to get away with murder by using our own crimes against us. I'm going to get away with justified homicide by presenting the complete facts of Roman's conspiracy. Keith sealed the envelope with deliberate care. Facts that you helpfully documented in writing. And if we refuse to support your story? Keith's expression hardened into something genuinely terrifying. Then I'll tell Detective Holt that you've been threatening to falsify evidence against me, that you're attempting to frame me for murder to cover up your own crimes. Your signed confessions will support that narrative perfectly. The room fell silent except for the ticking of Keith's antique clock. Marcella and Evan sat trapped between impossible choices, finally understanding that Keith had anticipated and prepared for every possible response to his actions. What do you want from us? Evan asked quietly. I want you to continue being my loving family, Keith replied. Support my story, maintain our public image, and live with the knowledge that Roman Cook died because he chose to threaten the wrong man's life. Keith stood and walked to the window overlooking the lake where Roman had died. Tomorrow, Detective Holt will reopen the investigation. The X-rays will be entered into evidence. I'll provide my revised statement about Roman's threats and his violent attack when confronted with his crimes. He turned back to face his wife and son, his silhouette backlit by moonlight reflecting off the water. And when the investigation concludes that Roman Cook's death was justified homicide committed in self-defense, our family will finally be able to move on from this tragedy. Together, Marcella began crying, not from grief or fear, but from the crushing realization that Keith had engineered a perfect psychological prison from which there was no escape. Every choice led back to him. Every secret he held made them more dependent on his protection. I heard my ribs crack under the chair, Keith said softly, rehearsing the words he would speak to Detective Holt. The ER called my wife and son. They said he had it coming. Even after, he may not survive. They never showed in court. The X-rays made their hands shake. Then I walked into court with the X-rays. The narrative was perfect. Keith as the victim of a murder plot, defending himself against a violent conspirator, supported by his family despite their initial shock at Roman's crimes. The X-rays that should have convicted him would instead vindicate him completely. Keith Cooper had transformed evidence of his guilt into proof of his innocence, turned his victims into accomplices, and emerged from scandal stronger than before. As he prepared for bed that night, Keith reflected on the completeness of his victory. Roman was dead. Marcella and Evan were broken and controlled. His business empire remained intact. His reputation had survived investigation and trial. Most importantly, he had demonstrated to anyone considering betrayal that Keith Cooper never forgave and never forgot. The consequences of crossing him weren't just severe, they were inescapable. In the end, justice had indeed been served. Keith Cooper's justice, measured in broken bones, shattered lives, and the absolute certainty that some men were simply too dangerous to betray. The X-rays would tell their story tomorrow, and Keith would finally close the books on the last loose ends of Roman Cook's conspiracy. After that, he could focus on building his empire even higher, secure in the knowledge that his family understood exactly what happened to people who threatened what he'd built. Keith Cooper had won completely, and he intended to savor that victory for the rest of his life. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another episode of Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. When Shadows Fall. Derek Lawson had always prided himself on reading people. 20 years in private security consulting had taught him that threats often came wrapped in familiar faces. But as his 8-year-old son Tyler's trembling voice echoed through their suburban home, Derek realized he'd missed the most dangerous threat of all. "Daddy, lock the door. Right now." The urgency in Tyler's whisper sent ice through Derek's veins. His wife Chloe had left for her sister's house barely 15 minutes ago, claiming she needed to help with wedding preparations. The timing now felt surgical in its precision. "Why, buddy?" Derek asked, his training kicking in as he scanned the living room for potential weapons. Tyler pointed toward the backyard with a shaking finger. "Mommy's friend is here. He told me to stay in my room until his work with you is done." The words hit Derek like a sledgehammer. His son's innocent description painted a picture that made Derek's blood boil. Someone had not only violated his marriage, but had the audacity to threaten him through his child. Derek grabbed his phone to call the police, his finger hovering over the numbers. That's when he saw the shadow move past the kitchen window. A tall figure, moving with purpose toward the back door. Derek's military instincts, honed during his time in the Marines before his security career, sparked to life. "Tyler, go to your room and lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you." As his son disappeared upstairs, Derek positioned himself behind the kitchen island. The back door handle turned slowly. Derek had installed top-grade locks on every entrance. Whoever this was had a key. The door opened, and a man stepped inside. Tall, athletic build, wearing expensive clothes that screamed corporate success. Derek recognized the type. Smooth talkers who thought money and charm could buy them anything, including other men's wives. "Hello, Derek." The man's voice carried an arrogant confidence that made Derek's jaw clench. "I'm Blake Morrison. I think it's time we had a conversation." Derek remained silent, studying his uninvited guest. Blake moved through Derek's kitchen like he owned it, opening the refrigerator and pulling out a beer. The casual violation of Derek's home sent rage coursing through his system. "Nice place you've got here," Blake continued, popping open the beer. "Though I have to say, Chloe deserves better. Much better. Get out of my house." Blake chuckled, taking a long sip. "See, that's where you're wrong. This isn't really your house anymore, is it? Chloe's been telling me all about your little marriage problems. The fighting, the distance, how you're never here for her or Tyler." Derek's hands slowly clenched into fists. "You have 10 seconds to leave before I throw you out." "I don't think so." Blake's demeanor shifted, the false friendliness dropping away. "You see, Derek, I know all about you. Your little security company that's barely breaking even, your gambling debts from that Vegas trip last year, how Chloe's been covering for your financial mistakes. She showed me the bank statements." The mention of the Vegas incident, a foolish weekend that had cost Derek $15,000 in poker losses, confirmed that Chloe had been sharing intimate details of their marriage. But Blake's knowledge went deeper than pillow talk. This felt orchestrated. "Chloe and I have been together for 8 months, Blake continued. "She's been planning to leave you for weeks. The only question is how messy this gets." For Tyler's sake, I hope you'll be reasonable. Derek's tactical mind was already analyzing the situation. Blake wasn't just some random affair. He'd done homework. The timing of Chloe's departure, the knowledge of Derek's vulnerabilities, even the key to the house suggested planning. This was an ambush disguised as a conversation. What do you want? Blake smiled, sensing victory. Simple. You're going to make this easy for everyone. Chloe files for divorce. You don't contest it, and we all move on with our lives. You get weekend visitation with Tyler, and Chloe gets to be happy for once. And if I refuse? Well, that would be unfortunate. Blake pulled out his phone, showing Derek a series of photos. Derek's stomach dropped as he recognized images of himself from the Vegas trip. Photos that could be easily misinterpreted to suggest activities far worse than gambling. Chloe took these from your phone. Amazing what people will believe when the right story gets out. Could hurt your security business, couldn't it? Hard to trust a man who can't even secure his own family. Derek realized he was looking at a setup that had been months in the making. Chloe hadn't just strayed, she'd been recruited. Blake wasn't just her lover. He was her partner in a calculated destruction of Derek's life. I can see you're starting to understand, Blake said. This isn't some sordid affair that got out of hand. This is business. Chloe wants out, and I'm helping her get what she deserves. Half of everything you own, plus alimony and child support. Consider it the price of your failures as a husband. Derek's mind raced through possibilities. Blake's confidence suggested he felt protected, but everyone had vulnerabilities. Derek's years in security had taught him that the most arrogant opponents made the biggest mistakes. I need time to think about this. Of course you do. Blake finished the beer and tossed the empty bottle in Derek's sink. Take all the time you need. But understand, this train has already left the station. Chloe's attorney will be calling you Monday morning. Play along, and this stays civilized. Fight it, and things get messy for everyone. As Blake moved toward the door, he paused. Oh, and Derek? Chloe wanted me to tell you that Tyler really likes me. Kids adapt so quickly to new father figures, don't they? The threat was clear. Blake wasn't just taking Derek's wife. He was positioning himself to take Derek's son. After Blake left, Derek stood in his kitchen, processing what had just occurred. 20 years of marriage, 8 years of fatherhood, and 15 years of building his security business. All of it under attack by a man who'd walked into his house like he owned it. Derek pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts. His first instinct was still to call the police, but Blake's words echoed in his mind. The photos, the financial information, the calculated nature of the attack. Blake and Chloe had prepared for legal warfare. But Derek hadn't survived 2 tours in Afghanistan and built a successful security company by playing defense. If Blake wanted war, Derek would give him war. But it would be fought on Derek's terms, using Derek's rules. As Tyler's footsteps creaked upstairs, Derek made a decision that would change all their lives. He wouldn't be calling the police. He wouldn't be hiring a divorce attorney. He would be doing what he'd always done when facing a superior enemy. He would be gathering intelligence, identifying weaknesses, and preparing to strike when his opponents least expected it. Blake Morrison had made one critical error. He'd underestimated Derek Lawson, and Derek never forgot, and he never forgave. Chapter 2. The Architecture of Betrayal. Derek spent the weekend in careful observation mode, watching Chloe return from her sister's house with the practiced eye of a surveillance expert. She moved through their home with subtle changes, checking her phone more frequently, arranging items differently, speaking to Tyler with a forced enthusiasm that felt like rehearsal. Sunday evening, as Tyler watched cartoons, Derek found Chloe in their bedroom, packing a small bag. Going somewhere, he asked casually. Just an overnight with Lisa. She's having some issues with the wedding planning. Chloe's lie came smooth and natural, confirming she'd had plenty of practice. Derek nodded, filing away the information. Lisa, Chloe's sister, lived 3 hours away. If Chloe was lying about going there, she was likely staying local with Blake. Another piece of intelligence. How long has this been going on? Chloe's hands froze on her suitcase. What are you talking about? The lying. The planning. How long have you been working with Blake Morrison to destroy our marriage? The blood drained from Chloe's face. She turned slowly, and Derek saw something he'd never seen before. Cold calculation replacing the warm familiarity he'd known for 20 years. Blake told me you two had talked. Talk. Derek let the word hang between them. Is that what we're calling home invasion now? Chloe straightened, her defensive posture shifting to something more aggressive. Don't be dramatic, Derek. You knew this marriage was over. You've known it for years. What I knew was that my wife was distant. What I didn't know was that she was conducting psychological warfare against her own family. Psychological warfare? Chloe laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're the one who checked out of this marriage. You're the one who started gambling again. You're the one who chose your business over your family. Derek studied his wife's face, recognizing the careful construction of her arguments. These weren't spontaneous accusations. They were prepared talking points designed to justify what she'd already done. Tell me about Blake. Chloe's chin lifted defiantly. Blake is everything you're not. He's successful, he's present, and he doesn't treat me like an obligation. How did you meet him? Does it matter? Humor me. Chloe hesitated, and Derek caught the micro-expression that revealed she was calculating her answer. At the gym, we started talking, and things developed naturally. Another lie. Derek's security company had clients in the fitness industry, and he knew the dynamics of gym relationships. Blake's calculated approach to their affair suggested a more deliberate meeting. Which gym? Why are you interrogating me? Because my wife has been planning to destroy my life for 8 months, and I'm curious about the timeline. Chloe's face hardened. This isn't about destroying anything. This is about finally being honest about what our marriage became. And what did it become? A mistake I stayed in too long for Tyler's sake. The words hit Derek like a physical blow, not because they hurt, but because they revealed the depths of Chloe's deception. She was rewriting 20 years of history to justify 8 months of betrayal. Tyler knows, doesn't he? About Blake? Chloe's defensive mask slipped for just a moment. Tyler likes Blake. He's good with kids. Tyler was terrified yesterday. He thought Blake was here to hurt me. Blake would never hurt anyone. Tyler just misunderstood the situation. Derek realized Chloe was either lying to him or lying to herself. Blake's behavior the previous day had been deliberately intimidating, designed to establish dominance. But Chloe was choosing to see what she wanted to see. What does Blake do for work? He's in corporate consulting. He helps companies streamline their operations. The vague description raised red flags. In Derek's experience, people were either proud of their work or embarrassed by it. Blake's job description sounded like something designed to avoid scrutiny. Where did he go to school? Derek, stop. I'm just trying to understand the man who's going to be around my son. Blake went to Northwestern. He has an MBA from Kellogg. He's probably more educated than both of us combined. The defensive pride in Chloe's voice told Derek she was repeating information Blake had given her, likely without verification. Derek made a mental note to investigate Blake's credentials. How much does he make? More than enough to take care of us. Us. Chloe's face flushed. Tyler and me. When we're together. So you're planning to take Tyler away from me. I'm planning to give Tyler a stable home with a man who actually wants to be a father. The accusation stung because it contained enough truth to be effective. Derek had missed school events for work, had been distracted during family time, had prioritized building his business over being present. But Blake and Chloe were weaponizing normal marriage struggles to justify something far worse. And my business? What about it? Blake seems to know a lot about my finances. Information he could only have gotten from you. Chloe's silence confirmed Derek's suspicions. You gave him access to our bank accounts, didn't you? I showed him some statements. He was helping me understand our financial situation for the divorce. For 8 months, you've been sharing confidential information about my business with a stranger. Blake isn't a stranger, and your business affects my future too. Derek realized the scope of Chloe's betrayal extended far beyond adultery. She'd been conducting corporate espionage against her own husband, sharing client information and financial data with someone whose motives were entirely unclear. Who else knows about Blake? What do you mean? Your friends, your family, Tyler's teachers. Who else have you told about your boyfriend? Chloe's hesitation revealed she'd been more discreet than Derek expected. Lisa knows. A few close friends. But not your parents. My parents wouldn't understand. Translation: Chloe knew her parents would see through Blake's act. Derek filed that information away as well. What happens now? Blake's attorney will contact you Monday. We're hoping this can be settled quickly and quietly. Blake's attorney? He's handling the legal aspects for me. Derek felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. Blake wasn't just Chloe's lover. He was controlling the legal strategy. Most affairs were emotional. This one was transactional. Chloe, I need you to understand something. If you proceed with this, there's no going back. Ever. I don't want to go back, Derek. I want to go forward. Even if it means destroying Tyler's relationship with his father. Tyler will have a better father figure with Blake. The casual dismissal of Derek's paternal bond with his son crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Derek realized Chloe wasn't just choosing Blake over him. She was choosing a complete erasure of their family's history. After Chloe left for her overnight with Lisa, Derek sat in his study, surrounded by files from his security business. His company specialized in corporate threat assessment, but the skills were transferable. Blake Morrison had declared war on Derek's family, and Derek was going to treat it like any other security threat. He opened his laptop and began researching. Blake Morrison, corporate consultant, Northwestern graduate, Kellogg MBA. Derek's preliminary searches turned up surprisingly little online presence for someone in consulting. No LinkedIn profile, no company website, no business registrations in the state database. Derek's suspicions deepened. In his experience, people who claimed impressive credentials usually left digital footprints. Blake's absence from normal professional networks suggested either he was using a false identity or operating in markets that didn't advertise openly. Derek picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. Rodriguez Investigations. Carlos, it's Derek Lawson. Derek, man, it's been forever. What can I do for you? Carlos Rodriguez had been Derek's partner during his early days in security. Now, he ran a private investigation firm specializing in background checks and corporate intelligence. I need a deep dive on someone. Personal favor. Name it. Blake Morrison. Supposedly a corporate consultant with an MBA from Kellogg. I'll send you what little I have. Sounds routine. What's the timeline? Yesterday. Carlos chuckled. That urgent, huh? This business or personal? Personal. Very personal. I'll have something for you by Tuesday morning. Derek hung up and stared at his computer screen. Blake Morrison thought he was playing chess with an amateur. But Derek had spent years analyzing threats, identifying vulnerabilities, and neutralizing enemies. Blake was about to discover that Derek Lawson wasn't just Tyler's father or Chloe's husband. Derek Lawson was a predator, and Blake had just made himself prey. Chapter 3. The Gathering Storm. Tuesday morning brought two pieces of intelligence that changed everything. The first was a phone call from Blake's supposed attorney, a generic voicemail from a law office Derek had never heard of, requesting a meeting to discuss amicable resolution of marital issues. The second was Carlos Rodriguez's background report on Blake Morrison. Derek read the report twice, his jaw tightening with each revelation. Blake Morrison existed, but barely. His Northwestern education was real, but his Kellogg MBA was a fabrication. His corporate consulting business had no registered address, no tax filings, and no legitimate clients. What Blake did have was a pattern of targeting vulnerable marriages in affluent suburbs, a string of aliases, and a criminal record that had been carefully sealed. Most importantly, Blake Morrison wasn't his real name. Derek called Carlos back immediately. Tell me about the sealed records. Took some digging, but I found traces. Your boy Blake used to be Brad Michaels. Got arrested for fraud and extortion in Oregon about 5 years ago. Case was dismissed on a technicality, but the pattern was clear. He was running romance scams on married women, getting them to leave their husbands and liquidate assets. How many times? At least 3 that I could find. Maybe more. Guy's a professional homewrecker, Derek. This isn't passion, it's business. Derek felt a cold satisfaction settle over him. Chloe thought she'd found love. Instead, she'd found a predator who specialized in destroying families for profit. There's more, Carlos continued. I found traces of 2 other women who got involved with him after their divorces were finalized. Both ended up financially ruined and emotionally devastated. Blake takes everything and disappears. Current address? High-end apartment complex downtown. Lease is short-term, paid 6 months in advance. Guy travels light and leaves quick when things get complicated. Derek absorbed the information methodically. Blake wasn't just threatening Derek's marriage. He was executing a practiced formula for financial and emotional destruction. Chloe was a mark, not a lover. Carlos, I need everything you can find on his current operation. Bank accounts, credit reports, travel patterns, communication records. Everything. Derek, what are you planning? Justice. Be careful, man. Whatever this guy did to you, don't let it destroy your life too. Derek hung up and immediately called his attorney, Gregory Palmer. Greg had handled Derek's business contracts for years and was one of the few lawyers Derek trusted completely. Greg, I need an emergency consultation. What's the situation? My wife is having an affair with a professional con artist who's planning to take her for everything she's worth. I need to know my options for protecting my son and my assets. Come in this afternoon. And Derek? Don't do anything stupid before we talk. Derek's next call was to his business partner, Lieutenant Colonel James Mitchell, retired. Mitch had served with Derek in Afghanistan and now co-owned their security consulting firm. More importantly, Mitch had connections throughout law enforcement and military intelligence. Mitch, I need a favor. Personal, not business. Name it. Derek explained the situation in military terms. Enemy infiltration, compromised assets, imminent threat to operational security. Mitch listened without interruption. So you're dealing with a professional operator who's been surveilling your family for months, has compromised your spouse, and is now threatening your child's welfare. That's the tactical summary. What's your mission objective? Complete neutralization of the threat. Derek, be very careful how you define neutralization. This isn't Afghanistan. I know exactly where I am, Mitch. But Blake Morrison made a mistake. He threatened my son. That afternoon, Derek met with Greg Palmer in his law office. Greg reviewed Carlos's report with the clinical precision of a prosecutor examining evidence. Derek, this changes everything. If we can prove your wife was targeted by a professional con artist, we can potentially void any agreements she's made under duress or fraud. What about Tyler? Blake's criminal background would make him unsuitable for any custodial role. Even if Chloe proceeds with divorce, her association with Blake would work against her in custody proceedings. And my business assets? If we can demonstrate that Blake gained access to confidential business information through fraud, we can protect your company from any claims in the divorce. Derek felt the first stirrings of a plan forming. Blake had built his strategy on deception and manipulation. Derek would use Blake's own tactics against him. Greg, I need you to prepare for a war. Blake Morrison thinks he's playing against an amateur. He's about to learn otherwise. That evening, Derek was in his study when Tyler knocked on the door. Daddy, can I ask you something? Of course, buddy. Come in. Tyler climbed onto Derek's lap, something he hadn't done in months. Is Mommy's friend going to live with us? Derek felt his heart break a little. Tyler was 8 years old and trying to process his world falling apart. What do you think about Mommy's friend? He's scary. He talks to me like I'm stupid, and he makes Mommy act different. Different how? Like she's pretending to be someone else. And she gets mad when I talk about you. Derek realized Tyler was seeing through Blake's manipulation in ways Chloe couldn't. Children often had clearer instincts about predators than adults. Tyler, I need you to know something very important. No matter what happens with Mommy, you will always be my son. I will always protect you, and I will always love you. Are you and Mommy getting divorced? Derek chose his words carefully. Mommy has made some choices that hurt our family. But whatever happens between Mommy and me, nothing changes between you and me. Well, I have to live with Blake. Not if I can help it. Tyler hugged Derek tighter. Good. I don't like him. After Tyler went to bed, Derek sat in his study, staring at Carlos's report. Blake Morrison, or Brad Michaels, had built a career on exploiting the vulnerabilities of broken marriages. He identified targets, gained their trust, isolated them from their support systems, and then systematically stripped them of their assets and dignity. But Blake had made a critical error in targeting Derek's family. Derek wasn't a suburban husband who would roll over and accept destruction. Derek was a former Marine, a security expert, and a man who'd spent his career identifying and neutralizing threats. Blake wanted to play games? Derek would show him what real warfare looked like. Derek opened his laptop and began typing. It was time to introduce Blake Morrison to consequences he'd never imagined. Chapter 4. Setting the Board. Derek's first move was patience. While Blake expected immediate panic and desperate attempts at reconciliation, Derek spent the week conducting surveillance and gathering intelligence. He watched Blake's routines, documented his patterns, and began building a comprehensive profile of his target. Blake lived in the Meridian Towers, a luxury apartment complex that catered to short-term corporate residents. Derek observed him leaving each morning at 8:30, returning around 6 p.m., with regular visits to upscale restaurants, expensive gyms, and shopping centers where he clearly wasn't shopping. On Thursday evening, Derek followed Blake to a coffee shop where he met with a blonde woman in her early 40s. Derek recognized the signs immediately. Anxious body language, frequent touching of her wedding ring, the desperate hope of someone believing she'd found salvation in a dangerous stranger. Blake was working another mark. Derek took photos from across the street, documenting Blake's meeting with what was clearly another married woman. Carlos had been right. Blake ran multiple operations simultaneously, maintaining a pipeline of vulnerable targets. Friday morning brought the breakthrough Derek had been waiting for. Carlos called with additional intelligence that made Derek smile for the first time in a week. Found something interesting about your boy Blake. He's got a partner. What kind of partner? Female, early 30s, goes by Amanda Price. She's the one who handles the initial approach and emotional manipulation. Blake comes in later as the knight in shining armor to rescue them from their terrible marriages. Current location? She's been staying at the Riverside Hotel downtown. Registered as a corporate consultant, same cover story Blake uses. Derek felt the pieces clicking together. Blake and Amanda were running a two-person operation, with Amanda handling reconnaissance and initial seduction while Blake closed the deals. Chloe hadn't stumbled into an affair. She'd been hunted. Carlos, I need everything you can find on Amanda Price. And I need it today. Already on it. I'll have a full workup by this afternoon. Derek's next call was to Mitch. I need you to run a security assessment on someone. Business or personal? Personal, but use business protocols. Full surveillance, communication intercepts, pattern analysis. Derek, you're walking into dangerous territory. Blake Morrison declared war on my family. I'm just returning the favor. What do you need from me? Technical support. Blake's been monitoring my communications and financial records through Chloe. I need to know everything he knows, and I need to control what he learns going forward. I can have a full electronic countermeasures sweep of your house and office done by tonight. We'll find every device, every vulnerability, every way they've been gathering intelligence. That afternoon, Carlos delivered Amanda Price's background report, and Derek understood the full scope of what his family was facing. Amanda Price was a professional manipulator with a psychology degree from a legitimate university and a criminal record that included fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy charges. She specialized in befriending lonely wives, building emotional connections, and then introducing them to Blake as the solution to their marital problems. Derek studied Amanda's photograph, attractive in a calculated way, with the kind of approachable prettiness that made people trust her immediately. He bet everything he owned that Amanda had been the one to first approach Chloe, probably at the gym or grocery store, striking up casual conversations that slowly built into friendship and then confidential confessions. That evening, Mitch's team swept Derek's house and office with military-grade detection equipment. They found 3 listening devices, one in Derek's home office, one in the master bedroom, and one in his car. They also discovered that Blake had gained access to Derek's email accounts through Chloe's computer. This is a sophisticated operation, Mitch reported. Whoever placed these devices knew what they were doing. This isn't amateur hour. Derek examined the listening devices with professional appreciation. Blake and Amanda weren't just romance scammers. They were running intelligence operations with the precision of corporate espionage. How long do you think they've been listening? Based on the battery levels and installation methods, I'd say at least 4 months. Maybe longer. Derek realized Blake and Amanda had been recording his private conversations, monitoring his business activities, and tracking his personal habits for months before Blake ever confronted him. They'd built a complete intelligence file on Derek's vulnerabilities, routines, and potential responses. But now Derek knew they were listening, which meant he could control what they heard. Mitch, leave the devices in place. But I want you to install counter-surveillance equipment that lets us monitor what they're monitoring. You want to feed them disinformation? I want to control the battlefield. Saturday evening, Derek was ready to begin his counteroffensive. He called Greg Palmer from a secure phone. Greg, I need you to start making inquiries about Blake Morrison with the State Bar Association. Very quiet inquiries about whether the law firm representing him is legitimate. What am I looking for? I suspect Blake's attorney is either Amanda Price or Blake himself operating under another false identity. If we can prove legal fraud, we can have any documents they've prepared declared invalid. That would be a federal crime. Yes, it would. Derek's next call was to Carlos. I need you to start monitoring Blake's communications. Phone records, internet activity, financial transactions. Everything. Derek, that's getting into surveillance territory that could cause us both legal problems. Carlos, Blake Morrison has been conducting illegal surveillance on my family for months. He's threatened my child, stolen my business information, and is planning to destroy my life for profit. I'm not interested in playing by rules he ignores. All right, but this stays between us. And if things go sideways, you never heard this from me. Sunday morning, Derek implemented his first tactical deception. He sat in his home office, knowing Blake was listening, and made a phone call to a fictional attorney. Yes, I understand. So you're saying if I agree to an uncontested divorce and don't fight the asset division, we can have this settled within 30 days? And you think that's my best option given the evidence they claim to have? All right, I'll consider it. But I want to meet with Blake Morrison directly before I make any final decisions. Derek hung up, confident that Blake was hearing exactly what Derek wanted him to hear, that Derek was broken, defeated, and ready to surrender. Blake's arrogance would make him believe his intimidation tactics had worked. In reality, Derek was preparing for the most important battle of his life. Blake Morrison thought he was hunting a suburban husband. Instead, he'd stumbled into the crosshairs of a former Marine who specialized in neutralizing threats to his family. Blake had made 2 critical errors. First, he'd underestimated Derek's capabilities. Second, he'd threatened Tyler. Derek never forgave threats to his son, and Derek never fought fair when his family was at stake. Chapter 5. The Trap Springs. Monday morning, Derek received the call he'd been expecting. Blake's supposed attorney, Dr. Patricia Williams, requested a meeting to discuss amicable resolution terms. Derek agreed to meet Wednesday afternoon, giving himself time to prepare the trap he'd been designing. Carlos called Tuesday with explosive intelligence. Derek, you're not going to believe this. Blake Morrison and Amanda Price have been running this scam for 3 years, but they're not the top of the food chain. What do you mean? There's a third partner, guy named Vincent Cross. He's the one who identifies targets and provides the operational funding. Blake and Amanda are field operatives. Derek felt his blood chill. How many families have they destroyed? At least 12 that I can't confirm. Maybe more. Vincent Cross specializes in targeting middle-class families with substantial assets and vulnerable marriages. He provides Blake and Amanda with psychological profiles, financial analysis, and operational support. Where is Cross? That's the interesting part. He operates out of a corporate office downtown, registered as a family counseling and mediation service. Completely legitimate on the surface, but I think it's a front for targeting potential marks. Derek realized his family hadn't just stumbled into an affair. They'd been selected by a criminal organization that specialized in destroying marriages for profit. Chloe wasn't Blake's lover. She was their victim. But her betrayal of Derek and Tyler meant she'd become their accomplice. Carlos, I need current surveillance on all 3 of them. Locations, communications, meeting schedules. Everything. Derek, what are you planning? I'm planning to end their business permanently. Wednesday afternoon, Derek arrived at the law offices of Williams & Associates for his meeting with Blake's attorney. The building was legitimate, but Derek's research had revealed that Dr. Patricia Williams was actually Amanda Price using another identity. Derek walked into the meeting knowing he was facing one of Blake's criminal partners. "Mr. Lawson, thank you for coming." Amanda, posing as Patricia Williams, wore an expensive suit and projected the confidence of someone accustomed to intimidating suburban husbands. "I hope we can resolve this situation amicably." Derek sat across from her, studying her face. She was younger than her photo suggested, with sharp intelligence behind her professional facade. This was the woman who'd befriended his wife, gained her trust, and then manipulated her into betraying her family. "What exactly are you proposing? Your wife has made it clear that the marriage is irretrievably broken. Mr. Morrison has graciously offered to help facilitate a clean separation that protects everyone's interests, especially Tyler's." Derek almost smiled. Amanda was delivering lines she'd clearly practiced on other husbands. But Derek wasn't other husbands. And Mr. Morrison's interest in facilitating my divorce would be what? Exactly. Amanda's confident demeanor flickered slightly. "Mr. Morrison cares about your wife's happiness. For 8 months, according to Chloe. Love doesn't follow convenient timelines, Mr. Lawson." "No, but fraud investigations do." Amanda's face went carefully blank. "I'm not sure what you mean." Derek pulled out a folder and placed it on the table between them. Amanda Price, also known as Patricia Williams, also known as Dr. Sarah Chun. Psychology degree from Ohio State, criminal record in 3 states, currently operating an illegal romance scam with Blake Morrison, aka Brad Michaels, under the operational control of Vincent Cross. Amanda's professional mask completely dissolved. Derek saw fear, calculation, and something that looked like respect flash across her features. "You've been busy. I'm a security consultant, Amanda. This is what I do for a living. What do you want?" "I want you and Blake to disappear. Tonight, I want you to leave Chloe alone, leave Tyler alone, and find another city to operate in." Amanda leaned back in her chair, studying Derek with new appreciation. "And if we refuse?" Derek opened the folder and showed her photographs of Blake meeting with other married women, financial records documenting the scam operation, and communication intercepts proving conspiracy to commit fraud. "Then I call the FBI. Romance scams that cross state lines are federal crimes. Wire fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit fraud. You're looking at 20 years minimum. Each. You don't have enough evidence for a conviction." "I don't need a conviction. I just need enough evidence to destroy your operation and make you too expensive to protect." Vincent Cross didn't build his business to support partners who become federal targets. Amanda was quiet for a long moment, clearly calculating her options. "Blake won't walk away. He's invested too much in this operation. Blake doesn't get a choice. Neither do you. And Chloe." Derek's expression hardened. "Chloe made her choice when she decided to betray her family. She'll live with the consequences. She really loves him, you know. This wasn't just manipulation. Amanda, you're a professional liar. You wouldn't recognize love if it came with documentation." Amanda smiled despite herself. "You're not what we expected." "No, I'm not. I'm what Blake gets for targeting the wrong family." Derek stood to leave, then turned back. "Amanda, give Blake a message for me. Tell him that if he ever comes near my son again, the FBI will be the least of his problems." After Derek left, Amanda sat alone in the conference room, processing what had just occurred. In 3 years of operations, no mark had ever turned the tables on them. Blake's confidence that Derek was a broken suburban husband had blinded them to the reality that Derek Lawson was a professional threat assessment expert who just turned their own tactics against them. Amanda pulled out her phone and called Blake. "We have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The kind that ends with federal prison if we don't disappear tonight." "Amanda, what the hell are you talking about?" "Derek Lawson just handed me a file that documents our entire operation. Names, addresses, financial records, communication intercepts. Everything." Blake was quiet for a moment. "That's impossible." "Blake, he knows about Vincent. He knows about our other targets. He knows everything." "Then we accelerate the timeline. Chloe files for divorce tomorrow, and we liquidate the assets before Derek can freeze them. Blake, you're not listening. Derek Lawson isn't some suburban husband we can intimidate. He's a former Marine who runs a security company. We're not hunting him. He's hunting us. No one threatens my operations. Blake, this isn't about your ego. This is about survival. Derek Lawson just declared war on us, and we don't have the resources to fight someone who knows how to fight back. But Blake had already hung up. Amanda stared at her phone, realizing that Blake's arrogance was about to destroy everything they built. And Derek Lawson was just getting started. Chapter 6. Escalation. Blake's response to Derek's ultimatum came Thursday morning in the form of a text message to Chloe. Emergency. Need to see you immediately. Don't tell Derek. Derek, monitoring all communications through the surveillance equipment Mitch had installed, smiled grimly. Blake was reacting emotionally instead of tactically, exactly what Derek had hoped for. Derek called Carlos. Blake's about to make a mistake. I need real-time surveillance on Chloe's meeting with him. Already on it. My team is in position. Derek's next call was to Greg Palmer. Greg, I need you to file emergency motions for protective custody of Tyler and freezing of all marital assets. Use Blake's criminal background as justification. Derek, that's aggressive. Are you sure you want to escalate this quickly? Blake just called an emergency meeting with my wife after I told his partner to leave town. He's not walking away. He's doubling down. Derek's phone buzzed with a text from Tyler's school. Tyler Lawson has been picked up early by his mother for a family emergency. Derek's blood went cold. Blake wasn't just doubling down. He was taking Tyler. Derek immediately called Chloe's phone. When she answered, he could hear Tyler crying in the background. Chloe, were you taking Tyler? Derek, we need to talk. Blake thinks you might try to interfere with the divorce proceedings. Where are you? Somewhere safe. Blake says you've been making threats. Derek's tactical mind immediately shifted into crisis mode. Blake had convinced Chloe to take Tyler as leverage, either to force Derek's compliance or to establish facts on the ground for custody proceedings. Chloe, listen to me very carefully. Blake Morrison is a professional criminal who specializes in destroying families for money. Amanda Price, his partner, has been lying to you for months. Derek, stop. Blake told me you might try something like this. Chloe, I can prove everything I'm telling you. Blake's real name is Brad Michaels. He's been arrested for fraud and extortion. He's running a scam operation with Amanda and someone named Vincent Cross. Derek, you're scaring me. You should be scared, but not of me. Derek heard Blake's voice in the background, telling Chloe to hang up. Chloe, please, just ask Blake one question. Ask him about Vincent Cross. The line went dead. Derek immediately called Mitch. They've taken Tyler. I need a tactical response team, and I need it now. Derek, slow down. What's the situation? Blake Morrison has convinced my wife to take my son from school. They're using Tyler as leverage to force my compliance with their demands. That's kidnapping. Yes, it is. And I'm not waiting for the legal system to resolve this. Derek, think carefully about what you're planning. If you respond with force, you could lose Tyler permanently. If I don't respond with force, I might lose Tyler permanently anyway. Derek's phone rang. Carlos. Derek, we have a problem. Blake didn't just take your wife and son. He's taken them to Vincent Cross's facility downtown. What kind of facility? It's registered as a family counseling center, but my surveillance shows it's set up like a safe house. Multiple exits, surveillance equipment, communication jammers. This is an amateur hour. Derek realized Blake wasn't just panicking. He was implementing a prepared contingency plan. Vincent Cross's operation was larger and more sophisticated than Derek had imagined. Carlos, I need the building blueprints, security assessment, and real-time surveillance on all entrances. Derek, what are you planning? I'm planning to get my son back. Derek's next call was to Greg Palmer. Greg, file emergency custody motions immediately. Cite kidnapping, endangerment, and association with known criminals. Derek, where are you? I'm going to get Tyler. Derek, don't do anything that will hurt your custody case. Greg, if I don't get Tyler back today, there won't be a custody case. Derek hung up and called Mitch. I need a full tactical assessment of Vincent Cross's facility. Treat it as a hostage rescue operation. Derek, you can't conduct a military operation in downtown in broad daylight. Watch me. But before Derek could implement any rescue plan, his phone rang. Unknown number. Hello, Mr. Lawson. This is Vincent Cross. Derek felt his blood pressure spike. The voice was calm, professional, and completely confident. Where's my son? Tyler is safe and comfortable. He's currently enjoying video games and pizza while the adults discuss the future. If you hurt him, Mr. Lawson, I have no interest in hurting anyone. I'm a businessman. I solve problems for people who find themselves in impossible situations. What do you want? I want you to understand the reality of your position. Your wife has decided to end her marriage to you. My associates have been helping her plan for a future that doesn't include you. This can proceed smoothly, or it can become complicated. It's already complicated. No, Mr. Lawson. Complicated would be Tyler spending the next several years shuttling between parents who hate each other, wondering why his family fell apart. Complicated would be expensive legal battles that destroy everyone's finances and emotional well-being. Derek realized Vincent Cross was far more dangerous than Blake or Amanda. Where they were emotional manipulators, Cross was a cold strategist who understood exactly how to apply pressure. What are you proposing? A clean resolution. You agree to an uncontested divorce with reasonable terms. Tyler maintains a relationship with both parents. Everyone moves forward with their lives. And if I refuse, then things become complicated for everyone. Your business comes under scrutiny for various regulatory violations that Amanda has discovered. Your finances become public record. Your personal life becomes a matter of legal proceedings that will drag on for years. Derek understood the threat. Cross wasn't just offering a deal. He was threatening total destruction if Derek refused to comply. I need to think about this. Of course. But Mr. Lawson, Tyler has school tomorrow. It would be unfortunate if his routine were disrupted because of adult disagreements. The line went dead. Derek sat in his car, processing what had just occurred. Vincent Cross had escalated the situation beyond a simple romance scam. He was holding Tyler hostage to force Derek's compliance with demands that would strip Derek of everything he'd built. But Cross had made one critical error. He'd assumed Derek would prioritize avoiding confrontation over protecting his son. Derek called Mitch back. Change of plans. I need you to contact Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Kim at Joint Base McCord. Tell her Derek Lawson needs a consultation on domestic terrorism threats involving child endangerment. Derek, you're talking about bringing military resources into a civilian situation. Vincent Cross just declared war on my family. I'm going to show him what war actually looks like. Derek had spent his career neutralizing threats to security. Vincent Cross was about to learn that threatening Derek's son was the most dangerous mistake he could have made. Chapter 7. The Hunter's Gambit. Derek's military training had taught him that the most dangerous moment in any conflict was when the enemy believed they held all the advantages. Vincent Cross was about to learn that confidence could be a fatal weakness. Derek spent Thursday night implementing a plan that would have impressed his former commanding officers. While Cross expected Derek to spend the night agonizing over impossible choices, Derek was instead coordinating with people Cross had never imagined existed. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Kim arrived at Derek's house at 0200 hours Friday morning, accompanied by 2 specialists from the Military Criminal Investigative Service. Sarah had served with Derek in Afghanistan and understood exactly what was at stake. Derek explained the situation. Derek laid out the intelligence files Carlos had compiled, the surveillance evidence Mitch had gathered, and the timeline of Cross's operation against his family. So you're dealing with an organized criminal enterprise that specializes in family destruction for profit. They've taken your son as leverage, and they're threatening to destroy your business if you don't comply with their demands. That's the tactical summary. Sarah studied the photographs of Cross's facility. This isn't a civilian matter anymore. Child endangerment by organized criminals crosses into federal jurisdiction. That's what I was hoping you'd say. One of Sarah's specialists, Agent Martinez, looked up from his laptop. Derek, Cross's operation shows patterns consistent with organized crime. The systematic targeting of families, the use of psychological manipulation, the financial exploitation. This looks like human trafficking disguised as romance scams. Derek felt pieces clicking together. They're not just destroying marriages for money. They're harvesting families for systematic exploitation. Exactly. And that makes Tyler's situation a federal emergency. Sarah stood up. Derek, I'm going to make some calls. By 800 hours, Cross is going to find himself facing federal agencies he didn't know existed. While Sarah coordinated with federal authorities, Derek implemented the second phase of his plan. He called Carlos. Carlos, I need you to execute Operation Scorched Earth. Derek, are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. They took my son. There's already no going back. Operation Scorched Earth was Derek's nuclear option. The simultaneous release of every piece of evidence Carlos had gathered to law enforcement agencies, news media, and professional networks in 3 states. Blake, Amanda, and Cross would wake up Friday morning to find their criminal enterprise exposed to everyone who mattered. But Derek's most important call was to someone Cross would never expect. Mrs. Morrison? This is Derek Lawson. I need to speak with you about your son, Blake. The elderly woman's voice was confused and concerned. I'm sorry. Who did you say you were? I'm calling about your son, Brad. The one you reported missing 5 years ago when he disappeared after being arrested in Oregon. The silence on the other end of the line told Derek everything he needed to know. Oh my God, you found him. Mrs. Morrison. Brad has been operating under the name Blake Morrison. He's involved in criminal activities that have put my 8-year-old son in danger. I need your help. Derek spent the next hour explaining the situation to Blake's mother, a woman who'd been grieving her son's disappearance for 5 years. By the end of the conversation, she was crying and demanding to speak with Brad immediately. Mrs. Morrison, I'm going to give you the address where Brad is holding my son. I need you to go there and demand to see him. He won't be able to refuse his mother. Derek's psychological warfare was just beginning. Friday morning at 0700 hours, Derek's phone rang. Vincent Cross, no longer sounding confident. Mr. Lawson, we seem to have some complications this morning. What kind of complications? Federal agents are asking questions about my business. Someone has been spreading false information about my associates. That's unfortunate. Mr. Lawson, I think there's been a misunderstanding about the nature of our arrangement. Derek almost smiled. Cross was discovering that Derek wasn't a suburban husband he could intimidate. Derek was a former military intelligence officer who understood how to wage total war. The only misunderstanding, Cross, is your assumption that I would negotiate with someone who threatens my son. Your son is perfectly safe. My son is being held against his will by criminals. That's not safe. That's kidnapping. Mr. Lawson, I think we need to meet in person to resolve the situation. We're not meeting anywhere. You're going to release Tyler immediately, or this situation gets much worse for you. I don't think you understand your position. Cross, you're about to discover that you don't understand mine. Derek hung up and immediately called Carlos. Phase 2 is complete. Every law enforcement agency in 3 states now has complete files on Cross's operation. The FBI is issuing warrants as we speak. Derek's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This is Blake. Meet me at Riverside Park in 1 hour. Come alone. Bring proof that you've called off the federal investigation. Derek forwarded the message to Sarah Kim and added his own text. The fish is taking the bait. Derek arrived at Riverside Park to find Blake waiting by the river, looking like a man whose world was collapsing. Blake's usual arrogance had been replaced by something approaching panic. Derek, we need to end this. Where's Tyler? Tyler is safe, but this situation has gotten out of hand. Derek studied Blake's face and realized the man was genuinely frightened. The federal investigation had shattered Blake's confidence and forced him to confront the reality that Derek wasn't a victim he could manipulate. Blake, you made a fundamental error. You assumed I was like your other targets. What do you want? I want my son back. I want you and Amanda to disappear forever. And I want Cross to understand that threatening my family was the worst decision he ever made. Derek, you don't understand what you're dealing with. Cross isn't just some con artist. He has connections, resources, protection. Blake, Cross is about to discover that I have better connections. Derek's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Federal raid's beginning now. Blake's phone immediately started ringing. He looked at the screen, and his face went white. Cross is being arrested, Derek said. Amanda is being arrested. Their financial accounts are being frozen. Their safe house is being raided. And your mother is waiting at Cross's facility to see her son, Brad. Blake looked like he'd been physically struck. My mother. She's been worried about you for 5 years, Brad. She thought you were dead. Derek watched Blake's psychological defenses crumble as the reality of his situation became clear. The federal investigation was destroying his criminal operation, but Derek's psychological warfare was destroying Blake himself. Derek, please. I just need to get Tyler and leave. I don't want anything else. Too late for that. You involved my son in your criminal enterprise. You threatened my family. You tried to destroy my life for profit. I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. Blake, you're going to prison. The question is how long you spend there. Derek's phone rang. Sarah Kim. Derek, we have Tyler. He's safe and unharmed. Cross and Amanda are in federal custody. Blake Morrison is the only one still outstanding. Derek looked at Blake, who'd heard enough of the conversation to understand his situation. Blake, you have two choices. You can run and spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder for federal agents. Or you can surrender and hope for a plea deal that gets you out of prison before you're too old to matter. Blake stood up slowly, his hands shaking. Derek, I never meant for it to go this far. Yes, you did. You planned every aspect of this operation. You targeted my wife, manipulated my son, and threatened my family. You meant for it to go exactly this far. Derek stood up and looked Blake in the eyes. But you made one mistake. You assumed I would let you win. Derek pulled out his phone and called 911. I'd like to report the location of Blake Morrison, a federal fugitive wanted for organized crime and child endangerment. As Derek gave the dispatcher their location, Blake Morrison, Brad Michaels, sat down on the park bench and put his head in his hands. His criminal career was over, his operation was destroyed, and his mother was about to learn what her missing son had become. Derek walked away without looking back. Tyler was safe, Cross was neutralized, and Blake was finished. But Derek wasn't done yet. Chloe still had to face the consequences of her choices. Chapter 8. The Unraveling. Derek found Tyler at the federal building Friday afternoon, surrounded by FBI agents and child psychologists who were ensuring he hadn't been traumatized by his ordeal. When Tyler saw Derek, he ran into his father's arms with relief that broke Derek's heart. Daddy, the bad man is gone. Yes, buddy, the bad man is gone forever. Agent Martinez briefed Derek on Tyler's condition. He's remarkably resilient. Blake and Cross treated him well during the time he was with them, probably because they needed him as leverage. But Derek, Tyler understood more about what was happening than they realized. What do you mean? Tyler told us that Blake was lying to his mother about you. Tyler tried to warn Chloe that Blake was dangerous, but she wouldn't listen. Derek felt another piece of his marriage die. Chloe had chosen to believe Blake over her own son. Where's Chloe now? She's being interviewed by federal agents. She's not under arrest, but she's definitely a person of interest in a federal investigation. Derek took Tyler home, where Mitch was waiting with a full security team. Derek's house was now under federal protection while the investigation continued, but Derek knew the real danger was over. Cross's organization was destroyed, Blake was in custody, and Amanda was cooperating with federal prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. Saturday morning, Chloe came home. Derek was in his study when she walked in, looking like someone who'd aged years in a single week. Her confidence was gone, replaced by confusion and something that might have been shame. Derek, we need to talk. Do we? Chloe sat down across from Derek's desk, her hands shaking slightly. The FBI told me everything. About Blake's real name, about his criminal record, about the organization. And I didn't know. Derek, I swear to you, I had no idea. Derek studied his wife's face and realized she was telling the truth. Chloe had been a victim of Blake's manipulation, but that didn't change what she'd done to her family. Chloe, when did you first meet Amanda? About a year ago, at the gym. She was so friendly, so easy to talk to. We became friends, and she encouraged you to talk about our marriage problems. Yes, she was such a good listener. She understood what I was going through. Derek realized Amanda had been cultivating Chloe for months before Blake ever appeared, building emotional dependence and identifying vulnerabilities that Blake could exploit. When did Amanda introduce you to Blake? About 8 months ago. She said she had a friend who'd gone through a similar divorce, someone who could help me understand my options. And you never questioned why a stranger was so interested in helping you leave your husband? Chloe's face flushed. Derek, I was unhappy. Our marriage was struggling, and here was someone who seemed to genuinely care about my feelings. So you share our private information with him. Our financial records, Tyler's school information, my business details. Blake said he needed to understand our situation to help me protect myself in a divorce. Chloe, you gave classified information about my security business to a criminal organization. The full scope of Chloe's betrayal was finally becoming clear to her. She compromised not just their marriage, but Derek's entire livelihood. Derek, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am genuinely sorry. Sorry for which part? The affair? The lies? Putting Tyler in danger? Or destroying my business? Chloe started crying. All of it. I made terrible mistakes. Derek felt nothing as he watched his wife cry. 8 months of lies, manipulation, and betrayal had killed whatever love he'd once felt for her. Chloe, Tyler tried to warn you about Blake. Your own son told you Blake was dangerous, and you chose to believe a criminal over your child. Tyler didn't understand. Tyler understood perfectly. Blake scared him. Blake threatened him. And you ignored your son's instincts because you were more interested in your fantasy than your family. Chloe wiped her eyes and looked at Derek with desperate hope. Derek, can we fix this? Can we go to counseling, work through this together? Derek's response was immediate and final. No. Derek, please. I know I made mistakes, but I was manipulated. I was a victim too. Chloe, you stopped being a victim the moment you chose Blake over Tyler. You stopped being my wife the moment you decided to destroy our family for a con artist. Derek, I love you. I never stopped loving you. You don't love me, Chloe. You never did. If you had loved me, you wouldn't have been vulnerable to Blake's manipulation. If you had loved Tyler, you wouldn't have put him in danger. Derek stood up and walked to his filing cabinet. He pulled out papers Greg Palmer had prepared and handed them to Chloe. Divorce papers. Already filed. You can contest them if you want, but the FBI investigation has documented your cooperation with a criminal organization. Your chances of getting custody or significant assets are essentially zero. Chloe stared at the papers in shock. Derek, you can't take Tyler away from me. I'm not taking Tyler away from you. You gave him away when you chose Blake Morrison over your son's welfare. The courts will give me visitation rights. Maybe, but Tyler will decide whether he wants to see you. And right now, Tyler is angry that his mother chose a criminal over her family. Derek moved toward the door, then turned back. Chloe, you need to understand something. There is no scenario where we reconcile. There is no future where I forgive you. You betrayed our family, endangered our son, and destroyed everything we built together. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. And choices have consequences. Derek, please don't do this. I'm not doing anything. You did this. 8 months ago, you decided our marriage was over. Today, I'm just making it official. Derek left Chloe sitting in his study, staring at divorce papers that would end 20 years of marriage. He found Tyler in the living room, playing video games with forced concentration. Tyler, Mom and I are getting divorced. Do you understand what that means? Tyler paused his game and looked at Derek with eyes that seemed too old for an 8-year-old. It means she chose Blake over us. Derek's heart broke at his son's mature understanding of an adult betrayal. Tyler, I need you to know that none of this is your fault. Mom made bad choices, but that doesn't mean she doesn't love you. If she loved me, she wouldn't have scared me with Blake. Derek realized Tyler had already processed his mother's betrayal and reached his own conclusions. Tyler understood that love required protection, loyalty, and sacrifice, things Chloe had failed to provide. Tyler, do you want to see Mom sometimes? Tyler considered the question seriously. Maybe when I'm older. Well, I can understand why she hurt us. Derek hugged his son, understanding that Tyler had inherited Derek's unforgiving nature. Some betrayals were too fundamental to overlook too destructive to forgive. Sunday morning, Chloe moved out of their house. Derek watched from his study window as she loaded her belongings into a rental car, occasionally stopping to cry. Tyler stood beside Derek, also watching silently. "Is she ever coming back?" Tyler asked. "Not to live here. This is our home now." "Good," Tyler said simply. Derek realized his son had already moved on. Tyler understood that families were built on trust, loyalty, and protection. Chloe had violated all three, and Tyler had written her off with the ruthless clarity of childhood innocence. As Chloe's car disappeared down their street, Derek felt a chapter of his life closing. The marriage was over, the threats were neutralized, and Tyler was safe. But Derek's revenge was not complete. Cross, Blake, and Amanda would face federal prison, but Chloe still needed to understand the full consequences of her choices. Derek had one final lesson to teach his ex-wife about the price of betrayal. Chapter 9. No Forgiveness. 6 months later, Derek sat in his attorney's office reviewing the final divorce settlement. The federal investigation had resulted in plea bargains for Blake and Amanda, 20-year sentences for Cross, and complete vindication for Derek's actions. His security business had actually grown stronger as word spread about how he'd neutralized a sophisticated criminal threat to his family. "Derek, Chloe's attorney, is asking for one final meeting," Greg Palmer said. "She wants to discuss the possibility of joint custody." "What did you tell them?" "I told them the custody arrangement was final. Tyler has made his preferences clear." Derek smiled grimly. Tyler had indeed made his preferences clear. In 6 months, Tyler had refused every attempt at reconciliation with his mother. Chloe's supervised visitation rights remained unused because Tyler simply refused to see her. "Sir, there's one more thing," Greg continued. "Chloe's financial situation has become quite difficult. The divorce settlement left her with minimal assets, and she's struggling to find employment." "Not my problem." "Derek, I know you feel betrayed, but Chloe is still Tyler's mother." Derek's expression hardened. "Greg, Chloe chose to destroy our family for a criminal. She endangered our son and betrayed everything we built together. The fact that she's suffering consequences doesn't create obligations for me." Derek left Greg's office and drove to Tyler's school, where he had a standing appointment to pick up his son every Friday. Tyler was waiting with his backpack and a report card that showed straight A's, something that had become routine since Chloe left. "How was school today?" "Good." Mrs. Patterson said Mom called the school again. Derek felt his jaw tighten. "What did she want?" "She wanted to know if I would talk to her. Mrs. Patterson told her I had to make that choice myself." "And what did you tell Mrs. Patterson?" Tyler was quiet for a moment. "I told her that Mom chose Blake over us. I don't want to talk to people who hurt our family." Derek realized Tyler had inherited his unforgiving nature completely. At 8 years old, Tyler understood that some betrayals were unforgivable. "Tyler, you know Mom wasn't trying to hurt us, right? She made bad choices, but she wasn't trying to be mean." "Dad, Blake scared me. He threatened you." "Mom knew that, and she chose him anyway." "That's not making bad choices. That's being mean." Derek was struck by his son's clarity. Tyler had reduced the complex psychology of betrayal to its essential truth. Chloe had chosen to harm her family rather than protect it. That evening, Derek was cooking dinner when his doorbell rang. He opened it to find Chloe standing on his porch, looking desperate and disheveled. "Derek, please. I need to talk to Tyler." "Tyler doesn't want to see you. He's 8 years old. He doesn't understand what happened." "Tyler understands perfectly. You chose Blake Morrison over your family. Tyler has decided he doesn't forgive you." Chloe started crying. "Derek, I've lost everything. My job, my apartment, my friends. Everyone knows what happened. I can't even get hired at retail stores because the background checks reveal my involvement with Blake's operation." Derek felt no sympathy. "That's what happens when you cooperate with criminals." "I was manipulated. The FBI said I was a victim." "The FBI said you were manipulated, not that you were blameless. You chose to betray your family, even after Tyler warned you Blake was dangerous." "Derek, I'm Tyler's mother. Doesn't that mean anything?" Being Tyler's mother meant something when you acted like Tyler's mother. When you stopped protecting him and started endangering him, you stopped being his mother in any way that matters. Tyler appeared behind Derek, having heard the conversation. Mom, Tyler, sweetie, I've missed you so much. Tyler stared at his mother with the cold assessment of someone much older. Why did you choose Blake over us? Tyler, I didn't choose Blake over you. I made mistakes, but I always loved you. If you loved me, you wouldn't have brought the scary man around. You wouldn't have let him threaten Dad. Chloe knelt down, trying to get to Tyler's eye level. Tyler, Blake lied to me. I didn't know he was dangerous. I told you he was dangerous. You didn't believe me. The simple truth of Tyler's statement hit Chloe like a physical blow. Her 8-year-old son had tried to protect their family, and she'd ignored his warnings in favor of a criminal's lies. Tyler, please, can't we try to be a family again? Tyler looked at his mother with something approaching pity. Mom, we're not a family anymore. You broke our family when you chose Blake. Tyler, families can be fixed. Dad says some things can't be fixed. He says some people don't deserve forgiveness. Chloe looked up at Derek with desperate anger. Derek, he's a child. You're teaching him to hate his mother. I'm teaching him that actions have consequences. You taught him that betrayal destroys families. Derek, please. I'll do anything to make this right. Derek's response was final and brutal. Chloe, there's nothing you could do to make this right. You betrayed your family, endangered your son, and destroyed everything we built together. Tyler has decided he doesn't want a relationship with someone who hurt his family. I support his decision. Tyler, please. Mom, I don't want to see you anymore. You scared me, and you hurt Dad. I don't forgive people who hurt my family. Derek watched his 8-year-old son deliver a verdict that would shape the rest of Chloe's life. Tyler had learned Derek's most important lesson. Some betrayals were unforgivable. Chloe stood up slowly, understanding that she'd lost her son forever. Derek, you've turned him against me. Chloe, you turned him against yourself. Tyler tried to warn you about Blake, and you ignored him. Tyler asked you to protect our family, and you chose to destroy it instead. Tyler doesn't hate you. He just doesn't trust you. And trust, once broken completely, can never be repaired. Derek stepped back and began closing the door. Chloe, don't come back here. Tyler has made his choice, and I will always support Tyler's choices when it comes to protecting himself from people who hurt him. Derek, you can't do this. I'm not doing anything. You did this 8 months ago when you chose Blake Morrison over your family. Derek closed the door and locked it. Through the window, he watched Chloe stand on his porch crying for several minutes before finally walking away. Tyler looked up at Derek. Is she ever coming back? Not unless you want her to. I don't. Derek hugged his son, understanding that Tyler had learned the most important lesson of all. Loyalty was earned, trust was precious, and betrayal was unforgivable. 6 months later, Derek received a letter from Chloe's attorney informing him that Chloe was moving to another state to start over. She was formally relinquishing all parental rights and would not be seeking any further contact with Tyler. Derek showed the letter to Tyler, who is now 9 and even more resolute in his decision. Do you want to say goodbye to Mom before she leaves? Tyler considered the question seriously. No, she already said goodbye when she chose Blake. Derek realized his son had inherited more than just his unforgiving nature. Tyler had inherited his strategic mind and his absolute clarity about right and wrong. That evening, Derek and Tyler sat on their porch, watching the sunset. Tyler was working on homework while Derek reviewed security contracts for his expanding business. Dad, yes. Are you sad that Mom left? Derek considered how to answer honestly. I'm sad that our family was broken, but I'm not sad that the person who broke it is gone. Me too. Derek looked at his son, resilient, brilliant, and absolutely loyal, and realized they'd both survived something that could have destroyed them. Blake Morrison, Amanda Price, and Vincent Cross were in federal prison. Chloe was gone forever, and Derek and Tyler were building a new life based on trust, loyalty, and the understanding that some things were more important than forgiveness. Derek had learned that mercy was a luxury he couldn't afford when his family was threatened. Tyler had learned that